Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games, and this is the 4th development log for Heroes Unbound, which is the superhero tabletop role-playing game that I've been writing for about a year now. In the first 3 videos of this series, we covered situations, aptitudes, resistances, and distinctions, and powers. Today, we're going to talk about how you use those things. In other words, we're going to be talking about task resolution. At its core, Heroes Unbound runs on a single, straightforward mechanic. It's a success count system, and here's how it works. Whenever your character attempts an action, you roll a number of d10s equal to your relevant attribute. That might be an aptitude like intellect or a power like fire manipulation. Regardless, you're going to roll the dice pool for that attribute and see what happens. Each die in the die pool has the possibility of generating a success. A 1 on a d10 generates 0 successes, a 2 through 9 on a d10 generates 1 success, and a 10 generates 2 successes. Once you're done rolling, you total up your successes and you compare that number to a target. If you meet or exceed the target number, you succeed. If you fall short, you fail. Simple enough. So, how do you determine the target number? Well, that depends on the type of action that you're performing. In Heroes Unbound, there are basically 2. There are static actions and there are opposed rolls. Static actions are tasks that are against a fixed difficulty set by the game master. The game master assigns a target number based on how hard the task is. Routine task is a difficulty of 1, a moderate task is a difficulty of 2, a challenging task a difficulty of 3, a hard task a difficulty of 4, an extreme task a difficulty of 5, and an impossible task a difficulty of 6. For example, let's say that you have the safecracker distinction and you're trying to pick a lock. The game master determines that it's a moderately difficult lock to pick, and so they assign a target number of 2. You roll your intellect 2d, and let's say you get a 7 and a 9. That's 2 successes. Since you met the target number exactly, it's a basic success, and the lock clicks open. But let's say, same situation, and instead you rolled a 10 and an 8. Well, that's 3 successes. So you beat the target number by 1, and that makes it a major success instead of a basic success. And if you'd rolled 2 10s on that roll, that would have been 4 successes, which means that you would have beat your target number by 2. So that would be a superior success. Beating your target number in that way means that you get additional results. The game master gets to decide, but those results could be that you picked the lock in a reduced amount of time, or that you found a trap that you didn't decide to look for beforehand, or something like that. So what about opposed rolls? Those work a little bit differently. This is what you use for combat or for any other situation where you have 2 characters that are opposing one another, that are competing with one another. So in those instances, both sides declare what they're doing. The attacker, for example, might describe that they're throwing a fireball at their target. Once the defender knows that that fireball is coming, they get to explain or describe how they're going to respond, how they're going to defend against that attack. Once those decisions are made, both characters roll their dice pools pretty much at the same time, and then whatever the defender rolls becomes the target number that the attacker has to match or beat. For example, let's say you're playing a speedster named Velocity, and he's going up against a mercenary named Ironclad. You tell the game master that Velocity is going to zip in with his super speed 4D and is going to deliver a flurry of blows on Ironclad. The game master explains that Ironclad's pretty confident. He thinks he can just take the blows, so he's going to stand there and just take it with his resiliency. Ironclad has a fortitude of 3D, so he rolls a 10, an 8, and a 3. That's 4 successes. That's pretty good on 3 dice. Velocity rolls a 10, a 9, a 7, and a 1. Not as good as he could normally roll, but that is still 4 successes. Since Velocity's number of successes matched the target number that was set by Ironclad's defense roll, the attack lands. As was the case with static rolls though, if you'd rolled higher, say you'd rolled 5 successes for velocity, you would have gotten a major success against Ironclad, and that would have caused more consequences to Ironclad. So again, pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and that's the core system. One roll, count successes, compare to a target number to see if you succeed or fail, and if you succeed, by how much. This is how it works pretty much regardless of what you're doing in the game. Okay, so mission accomplished. I've explained the core resolution mechanic. So I could go now, but I actually have a little bit more for you because I feel like geeking out a little bit about the design process and explaining how it is I got to this task resolution system. So if you're interested in that, stick around. If not, thank you for watching so far. Before I go on though, this is a good moment to remind you that if you're liking the video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that bell icon so you don't miss the upcoming development logs as well as my usual play reports. Okay, so here's how I got to this mechanic. Remember, when I first started designing Heroes Unbound, I wasn't trying to create a new resolution system at all. Heck, I wasn't even trying to create a new game. I was just trying to take the Champions Now situations mechanic and bolt them onto the Supers Revised chassis pretty much as is. Supers Revised also uses a dice pool system, but you use D6 instead of D10. You roll those dice, you add up all the numbers on the dice to get your result, and then you compare that number against a target number. If you match the target number, you succeed. If you beat that target number by 6, you get a major success. If you beat it by 12, you get a superior success. It's great, it's clean, it works. I like it just fine. Nevertheless, as I got to scribbling down those situations and playing around with the system, I got this impulse to start experimenting with D10s instead of D6s. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think part of it was that I just wanted something a little different. Part of it might have been some hint of nostalgia as I was looking up at my wall and seeing the old TSR Marvel Superheroes game and the Mayfair DC Heroes game and remembering what D10s felt like when I used to experiment a little bit with those systems. But as I fooled around with the D10, there came to be an emerging design goal that started to inform my decision. And that is that I started to want smaller dice pools to have a better chance of succeeding against larger ones. Something about underdog heroes being able to once in a while pull things off against a more powerful hero. So with that design goal in mind, I went ahead and made the shift to the D10. And then I immediately thought that it would be elegant to have the success levels break at increments of 5, which just felt right immediately, right? Like it's very intuitive to count by 5. So I was really happy with that. And that's what I went and took to the playtest. Now, with this new system in place, this early playtesting generated a pretty predictable dynamic. I was now generating a lot more successes than I typically did in Supers Revised. So for that reason, I decided to expand the categories. Supers Revised had normal, major, and superior successes. Heroes Unbound has basic, major, superior, legendary, and ultimate successes. So it's 5 tiers total. And that's the version of the game that I took to the big test, the big play test, my regular gaming group. When we played, we had 8 players. That's 8 heroes with lots of villains and lots of combat. And it was working really, really well. But I had the Dice So Nice module activated. And so whenever my players would roll to attack and whenever my players would roll to defend and they'd roll initiative, I'd watch this cascade of D10s swing across the screen. And sure, the virtual tabletop was adding it all up in an instant, but I started looking at all those numbers and thinking, oh my goodness, if my players have to add all the numbers that are on these D10s and then calculate how many increments of 5 they got above the target number, and they have to do that every time they attack, that's going to be overwhelming and it's going to slow down the game a lot. So on the one hand, I was really happy with how the game was working and with how everything was calibrated. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, I have a problem. This is going to be really slow at the table. The moment we're away from the VTT, is the moment that people are going to lose interest. So that's when I started experimenting with systems that I knew wouldn't work. I started thinking, okay, what happens if we get rid of the dice pool system and instead we roll a single D10, and then maybe the character gets a +2 or a +1 for each tier that they have in a power. So what used to be a 3D power would now be a D10 +4 power or something like that. And of course that's faster, but it just didn't work at all. It's flat. It loses a lot of all of the dynamics that the dice pool system gives me that I really like. And I really felt stuck. I mean, I was basically done writing the game, at least until playtesting would reveal other things that I wanted to address. But here I was almost at the end of the design process, and I started to feel like this additive dice pool mechanic was just going to not work. And I started to feel really down about it. But then I remembered a game that I hadn't thought about in a very long time, in part because I was never particularly into it, and that was Vampire the Masquerade. I mean, Vampire the Masquerade uses a dice pool system, a D10 dice pool system. And in that game, you're not adding the numbers together. You're instead looking for numbers that beat a particular threshold. I forget what the threshold is. Is it 8 or 9? I don't remember. But I thought, oh my goodness, that could maybe work in this case. And I remember picking up a D10 and rolling it while thinking about what the threshold would be. And before I even saw what number I rolled, I was like, wait a minute, this is what I'll do. And I mapped the system that you use with D6 and Champions to calculate body, or in Champions now it would be to calculate core. And I was like, that's what I'll do. I will have 10s count for 2, 2 through 9s count for 1, and 1s count as 0 successes. And then I started rolling dice, and I was like, this is easy to calculate. This is like really quick. It takes me seconds. And then I asked Lauren, who's my wife, who's one of our players who's like most annoyed by having to add up a lot of numbers in gaming. And I'm like, Lauren, adding up a bunch of D10s would be kind of annoying, right? And she's like, yeah, it probably will be. And I said, well, what about just counting 10s, counting 1s? She's like, that'd probably be a lot easier. I'm like, okay, this could probably work. And then in testing it, I realized that it is exactly what the system needed. Now it's quick. It does everything that it was doing before I made this shift, but now it's doing it much more quickly, and it feels good to me. You know, I'll let others decide how it feels more broadly, but to me, it feels really, really good and really, really slick. So I'm proud of it. And I'm also marveling a little bit at how I got to that point. And one of the nicest things is that I made this major change to the resolution system at the very end of the design process, and it didn't require any major rewriting. I just had to change the couple of paragraphs where the task resolution system is described, and then change a bunch of target numbers throughout the book, probably half hour of work, and done, which was a great relief for me. And so now I can confidently sit on this resolution system and say, hey, it works. All right, well, that's the story of how I got to this particular mechanic. I don't know if that's particularly interesting to anybody, but I'm sharing it in case it is. I really just wanted to geek out about it because it was a sometimes frustrating, but also fun and rewarding process. So, hey, I'm just putting it out there. All right. There's a lot more to talk about with regards to this game. There are systems that I haven't talked about today, systems for assisting allies and pushing beyond the limits and rallying during combat. But those mechanics deserve a deeper dive in future development logs. So we'll leave it for another time. For now, I thank you for tuning in. I thank you for your interest. And as always, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.